Karen demanded a shorter driveway, so I built a spiral ramp that circles my entire house. Have you ever felt the suffocating weight of someone else's rigid aesthetic demands pressing down on your personal space, dictating how you should live, even down to the very path you take to your own front door? I'm Arthur Finch, and my home, a charming, slightly eccentric Victorian house nestled in the meticulously manicured community of Grandview Estates, was my sanctuary. It wasn't just a house. It was a canvas for my passion, vintage cars. My driveway, a long, winding stretch of paved asphalt, wasn't just practical. It was a necessary feature, allowing me to safely maneuver my collection of classic automobiles, some of them quite long, in and out of my custom-built, multi-car garage at the rear of the property. It was my pride, my hobby, and a quiet rebellion against the cookie-cutter sameness that defined our neighborhood. Then, Ms. Genevieve Sterling arrived. Genevieve, the newly elected, self-anointed queen of the Grandview Estates Homeowners Association, saw my long, winding driveway not as a functional necessity, but as an unacceptable anomaly. She was all sharp angles and sharper pronouncements, a woman whose perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer activewear screamed unapproachable perfection. Her first official act, it seemed, was to send me a curt, imperious letter demanding the immediate reduction of my driveway. It was, according to her, excessively long, a visual blight, and a clear violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Her ultimate, thinly veiled demand was for me to shorten my driveway by at least 50 feet, replacing the existing graceful curve with a sharp, abrupt turn that would, in her estimation, harmonize with Grandview's luxury aesthetic. Her tone was dripping with condescension, her words a thinly veiled threat against everything I held dear. She looked at my driveway, a testament to practicality and passion, as if it were a festering wound on the pristine landscape she envisioned. I tried to reason with her, calmly explaining that the length and curve of my driveway were essential for safely maneuvering my vintage cars, some of which were irreplaceable. I even provided architectural diagrams showing the turning radius required for such vehicles. Genevieve merely waved a dismissive hand, her perfectly manicured nails glinting. "Mr. Finch," she purred, her voice a brittle whisper of disdain, "your hobbies are simply not suited for the elevated standards of Grandview Estates. We are building a community of distinction, and frankly, your overly long asphalt strip detracts from our property values. The bylaws are clear. All driveways must be uniform and aesthetically pleasing." Her words, delivered with an air of unassailable authority, left no room for debate. She was not interested in logic or practicality. She was interested in control and conformity. The true nightmare began on a sunny Tuesday morning. I stepped outside with my morning coffee, ready to take my prized 1957 Cadillac Eldorado broom for a spin, only to be met with a scene of utter devastation. A crew of construction workers, directed by a smirking Genevieve, were actively remediating my driveway. They weren't just shortening it. They were tearing up the original asphalt, replacing the elegant curve with a jarring, almost 90-degree turn, making it impossible for my longer vehicles to navigate without scraping their undercarriages. My meticulously planted rose bushes that lined the driveway were uprooted and discarded. Crude signs, emblazoned with the Grandview Estates HOA logo, were hammered into the ground, declaring the area under HOA Beautification Non-Compliant Structure Remediation. My heart sank, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This wasn't just an annoyance. It was an act of pure, malicious vandalism, a deliberate destruction of my property, and a direct threat to my cherished collection. As I stared at the rapidly hardening concrete, a glint of white caught my eye near the newly formed, sharp corner. It was a discarded, official-looking county plat map, crumpled but legible. My blood ran cold. I quickly photographed the scene and then, driven by a gnawing suspicion, I retrieved the map. It wasn't just a plat map. It was a detailed survey showing the property lines of Grandview Estates and the adjacent public park. The map clearly indicated that the section of my driveway Genevieve had just remediated actually encroached by a few feet onto a designated public easement for a future pedestrian pathway, a pathway that would connect the park directly to a new public transportation hub. Genevieve had not only ignored my warnings about practicality, she had deliberately, unknowingly, built her improved, driveway over public land, creating a dangerous bottleneck for future public access. And then, a chilling detail, tucked beneath a discarded traffic cone, I found a crumpled, mud-stained blueprint for a new, exclusive entrance to Grandview Estates, directly adjacent to my now shortened driveway. The blueprint showed that the new entrance, designed for a future luxury development within Grandview, would utilize the space created by my shortened driveway, effectively making my property a de facto part of their new, private access road. The beautification was a pretext. This wasn't just about my driveway. It was a calculated, high-stakes conspiracy, threatening not only my property, but a vital public resource and the community's future access to public transit. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, the photos of the destruction, the county plat map, and the discarded blueprint, I resolved to confront Genevieve publicly. I learned she had called an emergency HOA meeting, ostensibly to present a new community initiative, the Grandview Estates pedestrian pathway and new entrance. I arrived, my evidence ready, just as Genevieve, radiating an almost unbearable smugness, began her presentation, complete with glossy renderings of the new pathway and the grand new entrance. I waited for a lull, then stood up, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Genevieve, I stated, holding up the plat map, I believe this document and your recent actions sheds a rather inconvenient light on your pedestrian pathway initiative. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with self-satisfaction, immediately narrowed. She quickly recovered, her voice sharp. Mr. Finch, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is a private HOA matter. You are disrupting our proceedings, and your dramatics are quite unnecessary. She attempted to rally the other HOA members, painting me as a disgruntled, eccentric car collector, a nuisance to their refined community. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely the kind of element we are trying to remove from our beautiful Grandview. But just as she was about to call for me to be removed, a quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Davies, a retired city planning official who lived in Grandview and had been quietly researching the HOA's land dealings, rose from his seat. Actually, Miss Sterling, Mr. Davies interjected, his voice calm but authoritative, Mr. Finch raises a very serious point. That section of his driveway isn't just his private property. It's a designated public easement for the future Grandview Transit Connector pathway. Building over it is a direct violation of county zoning laws and obstructs public access. He then pulled out his own, more recent, official city planning document, which clearly showed the public easement. The room fell silent. A collective gasp rippled through the air. Before Genevieve could even stammer a denial, the doors to the community hall swung open. Two stern-faced individuals from the county planning department, accompanied by a county sheriff's deputy, walked in. They had been tipped off by Mr. Davies, who had confirmed my initial suspicions. Genevieve Sterling, one of the planning officials, announced, his voice devoid of emotion. You are in violation of multiple county ordinances. The destruction of private property, the obstruction of a public easement, and the suppression of urban planning documents constitute felonies. We also have reports of forged permits submitted to the county for this beautification project. Genevieve's face, which had been a mask of carefully constructed composure, crumbled into a terrified, pale mess. Her jaw went slack, her eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. She stammered, then erupted into a desperate, high-pitched shriek, blaming misunderstandings, overzealous contractors, and a misunderstanding of the land deeds. It was the pathetic wail of a tyrant whose kingdom had suddenly collapsed. Then, a surprising voice emerged from the crowd. Mr. Peterson, a long-standing, quiet member of the HOA board and a respected local real estate developer, stood up, his face etched with regret. "And Miss Sterling," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "perhaps you'd also like to explain why you pushed so hard for this new entrance project, not for the community's benefit, but because your husband's luxury home building company, Sterling Estates Development, stood to gain millions from the new section of Grandview, and you were promised a substantial personal consulting fee from the deal, all by ensuring exclusive access through this new private road?" The revelation hung in the air, a final, poisoned arrow. Genevieve had been exploiting the HOA not for the community's benefit, but for her own illicit financial gain and her husband's profit. The fallout was swift and brutal. Genevieve was immediately stripped of her HOA presidency, her reign ending in public humiliation and a perp walk captured by local news. The county planning department launched a full-scale investigation, leading to severe fines and criminal charges for property destruction, obstruction of a public easement, and fraud. Sterling Estates Development, facing legal repercussions and public outrage, immediately lost their lucrative contracts and faced a barrage of investigations, leaving Genevieve utterly isolated and financially ruined. She lost her position, her reputation, her social standing, and faced a future of crushing debt and legal battles. Her karma was a public, humiliating spectacle, a direct consequence of her petty tyranny and audacious fraud. As for my driveway, the county ordered the immediate removal of the illegal concrete and the restoration of the public easement. But the original, elegant curve of my driveway was gone. So, with the help of a brilliant architect friend, I designed something truly unique. Something that would make a statement. Something that would be impossible for the HOA to complain about without looking utterly ridiculous. Over the next few months, a truly monumental structure began to rise in my backyard. It wasn't just a driveway. It was a magnificent, multi-level spiral ramp, crafted from polished concrete and gleaming steel that gracefully circled my entire house, providing a grand, sweeping entrance to my rear garage. It was a silent, unyielding monument to defiance, a permanent, undeniable presence that dwarfed every other structure in the neighborhood. The HOA bylaws, meticulously reviewed by my lawyer, had no provisions against spiral ramps. The sight of that magnificent structure, a symbol of my unwavering will, towering over the manicured lawns of Grandview, was a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. My vintage cars, now with an even more dramatic entrance, gleamed under the sun, a constant reminder to Grandview estates of the price of their former president's arrogance. I felt a profound sense of vindication, a quiet triumph that justice, however painfully achieved, had prevailed. My cars were safe, my passion restored, and the community, shaken but united, began the process of rebuilding trust and respecting the delicate balance of property rights and personal expression. In a world where bureaucratic power can become a weapon and individual ego can endanger an entire community, where do we draw the line between upholding rules and protecting personal property and public access? When faced with such blatant disregard for rights and sanity, what would you have done?